Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you all. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick. We are thrilled tonight to welcome back the distinguished George F. Will, who will be in conversation with the award-winning broadcast journalist. I'm sorry, I'm sure you won many awards. I can't be exactly sure which Warren, but Warren Olney. I welcome you on behalf of our leadership, Zev Yaroslavsky, Mel Levine, Caroline Kelly, Rabbi Ken Chazen, and David Lair, the leadership team of Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc., the creators of this series. Thank you to our many wonderful co-sponsors, Temple Isaiah, Stephen Wise Temple, Valley Beth Shalom, Temple Beth Am, Leo Beck Temple, ECAR, Temple Israel of Hollywood, Jewish Center for Justice, the Holocaust Museum LA, the Forward, and the Pico Union Project. As it is Thanksgiving Eve, just a word on that topic. On October 3rd, 1863, at the height of a bloody war dividing our country, Abraham Lincoln issued a Thanksgiving proclamation, which officially established Thanksgiving as a national holiday. He proclaimed that though the nation was at war with itself, there were still blessings for which both sides could express gratitude. He also proclaimed that despite the painful and divided times, all Americans should be concerned about those who are suffering as a result of the civil strife. He officially set forth the last Thursday of November as a day of Thanksgiving. He asked everyone to pray to heal the wounds of the nation and to restore it to the full enjoyment of peace, harmony, tranquility, and union. President-elect Biden spoke today to the American people. He similarly acknowledged the country's deep divide and also urged unity. In a statement which harkens back to Lincoln's Thanksgiving proclamation, President-elect Biden said, quote, "Looking back over our history, you see that it's been in the most difficult circumstances that the soul of our nation has been forged." I, for one, am inspired by the optimism expressed by President Lincoln and President-elect Biden, and pray that we can pick up our pieces as a nation and begin the process of healing. After all, if our American forebears pulled together, however imperfectly, in 1865, surely there is hope for us now. In that spirit, I want to urge you to register for our December 15th. It's a Tuesday night, not a Wednesday night. December 15th program. We have worked hard to gather together the top national leaders of the Muslim, Jewish, Hispanic, Black, and Asian communities for a discussion entitled, "After 4 Years of Bigotry, Tension, and Division, How Do We Heal?" We will welcome Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL, Derek Johnson of the NAACP, Cindy Benavides of the League of United Latin Americans, Salamo Mariotti of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and Kathy Cochin of the Asian American Health Forum. This is an impressive group of national leaders, and the conversation is sure to be far-reaching and important. We hope you will register tonight via the email you will get immediately after the program. And because all of the studies prove that those who feel and express gratitude enjoy a longer lifespan, I would like to express gratitude to our many incredible speakers and moderators, to our audience members, and to my colleagues, Zev and Mel, and especially to David, with whom I work on this series every single day. Please welcome David, who will tell you a bit more about our upcoming programs and introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Janice. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate and I share your feelings of Thanksgiving. On behalf of community advocates, I'm pleased to join you in welcoming you all to another of our America at Crossroads virtual town halls. This, the 32nd in our series. Our run of influential speakers continues from tonight to the end of December. Next week, we will have Congressman Adam Schiff in conversation with Madeline Brand discussing plans for the next Congress. The following week, we have Secretary Leon Panetta, former head of the Defense Department, the CIA, Chief of Staff, Office of Management Budget, and Congressman, views on the issues surrounding transition and governing. And on December 23rd, New York Times columnist and Pulitzer Prize winner Bret Stephens will be returning with Professor Henry Weinstein of UC Irvine. Tonight, we will be treated to an analysis of what the past tumultuous 4 years and the head-spinning past 3 weeks portend. Our guest is a man who is the thinker that many of us would most like to hear from when it comes to figuring out what events around us mean, George Will. He was with us 5 months ago for a memorable evening as well. He is a columnist, television personality, and author. The Wall Street Journal has described him as perhaps the most powerful journalist in America. He's a twice-weekly columnist in the Washington Post and a contributor to NBC News and MSNBC. He's won a Pulitzer Prize and widespread recognition for his commentary and his books covering subjects ranging from politics to diplomacy to baseball. His topic tonight is, where do we go from here? The impact of the Trump era. Once again, our moderator is our good friend Warren Olney, a Los Angeles treasure. He's the host and executive producer of the podcast To The Point and To The Point's Climate Change Update. He's the recipient of nearly 40 national, regional, and local awards for broadcast excellence, from Emmys to Golden Mikes, including his colleagues' Lifetime Achievement Award. I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and welcome Warren to this evening's hosting.
David, thank you very much. And Janice, thank you for that very moving comment about Thanksgiving, which I also adhere to, as David said he did. It's always great to host these programs, and it's a special privilege for me to talk to George Will, such an interesting writer, a wonderful writer, a very creative thinker, and a man who manages to still be a conservative, even though he's not a Republican anymore and hasn't been for the past 4 years. We'll hear about that. And George, Will, I want to welcome you. Your recent column about the census was sent out to those who have registered to listen today and to watch today. And I will get to that. But first, the transition has begun, and I think it really is apropos to start there. So give us a couple of minutes on how you think it's going so far.
I think it's going well. We had to go through this protracted tantrum on the part of the 45th president and the 46th president, but the institutions work rather well and without much friction. We've heard an awful lot in the last 4 years about the threat to our institutions and to our democracy. I think people lost sight of the fact that this country was not made by fragile people, and it is not a fragile country. So I don't think our institutions have ever been threatened. We've had one great constitutional crisis in this country, and that was the Civil War. None since, even in Watergate, and I was just beginning as a columnist during that. Even in Watergate, the institutions, public as well as private, that is to say, Congress and the courts, as well as journalists and others, performed well, and we got through it. So we will get through this also.
What about the fact that the president has so far refused to acknowledge the vote, has cast doubt on the integrity of the whole elective process? Isn't that a threat to the institutions of the United States?
I don't think so. First of all, I think the vast majority of Americans are not subscribing to this. Even his supporters are going to look skeptical. There comes a point in the life of a nation when occasionally worse is better. And the worse he behaves, the better it is, because people are going to see now a sore loser, and that will help assuage the sense of grief on the part of his supporters. The most alarming thing about this election is that 4 million more people voted for him after watching him for 4 years than voted for him in 2016. And these are our fellow citizens, and we should try to understand what their grievances are and their anxieties and fears. But that said, we also have to draw a line and say that there's no obligation for us to indulge these kind of fantasies. But the fact that his legal team has performed like the gang that couldn't shoot straight, laughed out of court, is, as I say, worse is better at sometimes. And the worse they look, the better it is for the country overall.
You talk about the grief of his supporters over the failure of his campaign, but isn't there anger really something we're going to have to deal with? And isn't that a stronger impulse, or at least one that is more troubling than grief?
I don't think the American people as a whole are angry. I think they're exhausted. I don't think they want a revolution. They want a restoration of civility and something like normality. The cable television audience on both sides is kind of angry. They're at a perpetual rolling boil because they enjoy that, I think. But there are 330 million people in this country, and at any given time, about 322 million of them are not listening to talk radio and not watching cable television. They're watching the car, fixing the screen doors, raising children, getting on with life. And I think that's what America voted for with Mr. Biden. Remember this, in the primaries, only 1/3 of the primary voters voted for Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, the kind of angry side of the Democratic Party. That means 2/3 didn't. And the people who voted for Mr. Biden voted for his demeanor, just as Mr. Trump's demeanor was part of his selling point, so too Mr. Biden's demeanor, which is placid, affable. He has that almost electric Jack Nicholson smile of his. And I think the contrast of personas was very telling.
Now the president-elect has introduced the 6 potential cabinet members, all involved in national security in one way or another. You thought President Trump, I think, was dangerous to the country. Do you feel safer already?
Well, much, yes. I mean, these are veteran people. They know government. They don't think government is a foreign country or the adversary. They're vastly experienced, temperate people. No one at this point, it seems to me, can be alarmed by these people. Now, Mr. Trump selected some good people early, but he ran through them a mile a minute. He's had, God knows, I've lost track of how many national security advisors and secretaries of defense. So I think what Mr. Biden is trying to communicate and to produce is continuity, stability, calm, adult supervision has come back to Washington.
I'm interested in how you feel about John Kerry having been introduced as the climate envoy, and he promises to get some climate in some way involved in every department of government, and the president has said he's going to be a part of the very important conversations that go forth. You're not a climate denier, but you have indicated that you're somewhat skeptical about the whole idea of climate change and the havoc that it might wreak. And I'm just interested in your take on the importance of climate to this cabinet and to John Kerry's appointment.
Well, it's very important to the president's constituency. The Democratic Party is deeply concerned about this, and the president's responding to that. You're right, I'm not a climate change denier. It seems to me the one thing we can all agree on, this is where the debate begins, not ends, is the climate changing? The answer is, of course, it never is not changing. It's a very complicated dynamic system. And the idea that the carbon using activities of 8 billion human beings on the planet can make a difference to the planet is hardly controversial. The question then becomes, what do we know for sure? How certain are the scientific predictions? How much should we wager on these predictions in terms of excisions from our freedom and trillions of dollars spent? And does it make more sense in terms of economic efficiency to try and change the dynamic of climate change or accommodate it with measures of adaptation to, say, rising sea levels? Sea levels have been rising since the middle of the 19th century. So this is not new, and this is the sort of thing I think we can all cope with. Again, the important thing is everybody calm down, deep breath, and cope. We're really good at coping when we're thinking clearly.
You mentioned the possibility of spending a lot of money with regard to climate change. I know you're concerned about the deficit. You said that the Medicare and Social Security aren't sustainable, and that's partly because when they become unsustainable, the people in charge won't be around anymore. Isn't that same thing true with regard to climate change? And isn't it important to deal with it in important ways now so that it doesn't ruin the lives of our children and grandchildren?
It is indeed important to do that. But again, we have to understand that if we're talking about the rise of sea level, how high? We're talking about an increase of 1 to 2 degrees Celsius 100 years from now. Most projections of 100 years out are going to be wrong, or they're going to be certainly inaccurate. So yes, indeed, prophylactic measures are in order at this point. But again, no more confidence should be invested in science than the science itself has. And really good scientists are among the first to say it's a tentative business, particularly climate science, which is a swirling cyclone of very complicated variables.
Let me ask you this. You wrote in June that not only should Trump be removed, but that voters must dispatch his congressional enablers, especially the senators who still gamble around his ankles with a canine hunger for petting. I love that phrase. Well, anyway, you wanted that to happen, but it didn't happen. The enablers are still there. How concerned are you about that?
Well, I'm not. I think they feel chastened. I think you have to understand one thing. They've not displayed, shall we say, a spine of steel in dealing with the president. Teddy Roosevelt once said in criticizing someone that someone had a backbone that he could carve out of a chocolate eclair. He said of Oliver Wendell Holmes that he could have carved his backbone out of a banana. Some of these people in the Senate are like that, I'm afraid. But understand this, there is zero, and I mean zero affection in the Senate for the president. He has no friends, no admirers. And when he's gone, as soon he shall be, some of these people are going to snap back to a position of recognizable dignity. Some of them deserve to lose, they didn't lose, but you know, the American people must like divided government because they certainly produce it often. And their instinct is not wrong. In fact, my belief is that Joe Biden would probably be just as happy to have a Republican Senate, because then he can turn to some of his critics on the left and say, pack the Supreme Court, statehood for Puerto Rico, abolish the Electoral College. Can't do that because of the Senate. So let's get on with things the American people are actually worried about.
You said that Biden would benefit, as you just did, from Republican control of the Senate, and that Mitch McConnell could modulate senatorial strife and go down as a consequential conservative, which I assume is high praise. How likely is that to happen?
I think it's more likely than you might think. To me, the biggest problem in our country institutionally is the presidency has become untethered from constitutional restraints. And I'm not talking about this president or Barack Obama, I'm talking about all presidents in the last 80 years. The imperial presidency has fundamentally disrupted the Madisonian equilibrium of the three branches of government. So it is very important that Congress reestablish itself, quit vesting presidents with enormous emergency power discretion, do its job, and again establish, as it is, Article 1 of the Constitution, congressional primacy in our democracy. That's the important thing. So it is very important that Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell are institutionalists from the Senate. Joe Biden, at 36 years of Senate experience, has 50% more congressional experience than any other prior president. Gerald Ford had 24 years, Lyndon Johnson had 24 years. Joe Biden has 36 years, and this is the 36th year of the Senate for Mitch McConnell. These men respect the Senate. Neither really wants to get rid of the filibuster. Everyone wants to have a more dignified, consequential, deliberative Congress, and I think you're apt to see that. I think, for example, you will see a much less promiscuous use of the silly filibusters that we now have. And particularly, I think you'll see a signal of this when Mitch McConnell begins to speed through many of the executive nominees from Joe Biden. I don't think you're going to see, as, by the way, Mr. Schumer has done to the Trump nominees, sort of civil wars over assistant secretaries of this and that.
Why, though, should Mitch McConnell try to modulate senatorial strife when he's got all these senators who are running for president in 2024, and all of them are going to want to appeal to those 72 million people, or however many there were, who voted for Donald Trump, and they're going to want to maintain or reach out to those voters, please those voters. Aren't they liable to be doing the same kinds of things that they have done during the presidency of Donald Trump?
That will be a problem. There's no question. Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and, God save us, Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio and all the rest. It's commonly said in Washington that every time a senator looks in the mirror in the morning to apply her makeup or put on or for him to shave, they see in the mirror a president. And this is just a transactional cost of being in the Senate. But remember, Mitch McConnell is not sympathetic to these people. Mitch McConnell is what he is because he has never entertained presidential aspirations. One of the reasons is that, as National Review said many years ago, Mitch McConnell can't possibly run for Senate because he has the tight-lipped, owlish demeanor of George Will. Rather harsh, I thought, but not unfair.
Well, you're not being tight-lipped and owlish at the moment. So congratulations for getting rid of that image, at least for this program. Senators who want to run for president, you've said the party is a cult, and it has become a cult. That's why what you said when you resigned from it, and when the nomination of Trump occurred. Is it still a cult, or do you think that it will make an effort as political leadership to try to persuade those 72 million people who are adherents to it that they have something better to do than the kinds of things that they wanted Trump to do?
It's too soon to say. The truth of the matter is we don't know. There are some, Tom Cotton, for example, Arkansas, has 2 Harvard degrees, 2 stints in the U.S. military, a very intelligent man, but a man who, along with Josh Hawley, wants to produce what I guess you'd call, although it's oxymoronic to say so, the thinking person's Trumpism. And I think they're going to try to do that. I think there'll be others in the Republican primaries in 2024 saying, look, we want to go back to what we had. We want to go back to Ronald Reagan, who said, I do not want to go back to the past. I want to go back to the past way of facing the future. There's going to be a serious argument about free trade, because when this Republican Party began to dally with protectionism, what is protectionism? It's the government telling people what they can buy, in what quantities, and at what prices. It's managed trade. If that isn't the essence of large government industrial policy, what is? So the Republican Party has a period of rethinking to do. And my hunch is that if they say we're simply going to be Trump without the messenger, they're going to find out that Trump was mostly the messenger, mostly the manner, mostly the demeanor, mostly the pugnacity. 1968, you and I are probably old enough to remember this, George Wallace ran for president, got 9.8% of the popular vote. He won 46 electoral votes. And one of his mantras as he campaigned was, he said, hell, there's too much dignity in government. Well, the people liked that, just as Mr. Trump's absence of dignity was part of his appeal. So the Republican Party has to decide, is it a party of governance or is it a party of theatrics? Is it a party of inflammatory gestures? Too soon to say, and we're going to find out fairly quickly.
Let me ask you this. You're an advocate of libertarianism and individualism, American individualism. What about that concept when it's used as an argument for not wearing a mask in the interest of public health? And no government can tell me what to put on my face. So we see that again and again and repeated again and again. And people are using weapons when they march in the street with that advocating that they're simply not going to tolerate that kind of thing. And when they do that, of course, we are all subject to the spread of disease. What happens? What do you say to people who have that position?
I say the following. I am, as you say, libertarian-ish, which is to say, I believe that before the government interferes with the freedom of the individual, it ought to have a good reason and ought to say what it is. Well, a communicable disease is a really good reason. I'm a lapsed professor of political philosophy. I went to Oxford to study. I got a PhD at Princeton and briefly taught political philosophy. And one of the texts you read as a political philosopher is John Stuart Mill's On Liberty, who said there's a distinction to be drawn between self-regarding acts, those are acts that don't affect other people, and other regarding acts. Carrying COVID-19 is obviously an other regarding act. And this is such an easy measure to take. This idea, this kind of, I call it country music manliness on the part of people who won't wear a mask. You know, the country music lyrics, I'm a bass fishing, truck driving, beer drinking, good old boy, and no one can interfere with my liberty. This is a minor excision from your liberty, and it will save your life and perhaps that of your friends.
Well, that's persuasive to me, but it doesn't seem to have been persuasive to a lot of Americans and not to a lot of members of Congress, including members of the Senate, who have apparently spread the disease in the chambers of the Senate. So again, how can you expect that party and the members of that party to lead in such a way that millions of people will be willing to deal with the disease the way we ought to deal with it?
I understand the problem. I think that the most instructive teaching that is being done is by the numbers we see every morning on television as we pass 250,000 deaths. If there are some people you just can't reach, it's a Darwinian moment. And we're going to find out who's going to be fit to survive and who isn't.
Let me get to what I promised earlier and what was promised when your column was sent out to the people who have registered to attend this event. There is a case coming up before the Supreme Court on Monday that has to do with a challenge to the census, which under Trump did not include unauthorized immigrants. He calls them illegal aliens. You have said that that violates two provisions of the Constitution with both a philosophic and practical consequences. So tell us about that.
Well, the question is, the Supreme Court is construing the two clauses that talk about the enumeration. It's really quite tells you something about the enlightenment nature of the American founders, that they wanted a census. They wanted to know things. They thought that information could be the basis of rational improvements. They had to have a census because they had to know how to apportion seats in the House of Representatives. At issue in the Supreme Court case is exactly that. Should unauthorized immigrants be counted for the purpose of allocating congressional seats? The question is, what then did the founders say? And this is where Republicans who say they're for originalism, that is, they want to construe the terms of the Constitution in terms of the original public meaning. When they said that the enumeration should count all persons in the 14th Amendment and elsewhere in the Constitution, did they mean more than just citizens? And the answer is yes, because frequently in the same Constitution, they refer to citizens when they meant citizens and persons when they meant persons. And it's very clear that, and this is how I think it will turn out, that in fact, the counting all people and all residents of the country, all inhabitants of the country, for the purposes of representation is going to be yet another defeat for the president in the Supreme Court.
But they also said all persons except untaxed Indians.
Yes.
Specific. And might that not refer then to people who are in fact citizens of other countries who just happen to be here for one reason or another?
No, you're quite right to focus on that. It's that other than Indians not taxed, and Indians were regarded in the founding era as adherents of another sovereign, that is, loyalty to their tribes. They were in that sense not members of the American community. The fact is, American unauthorized immigrants in this country are members of the American community, and that will, I think, feature in the Supreme Court argument, because they're going to say inhabitant means someone who is here indefinitely. Let me give you a number or two here that are kind of interesting. Of the 10.5 million unauthorized immigrants in this country, 60% have been here 10 years or more. 20% have been here 20 years or more. 1 in 3 are homeowners. 15% have bachelor degrees or more. So the fact is that, by the way, 4.1 million children in this country were born here, and therefore under birthright citizenship and the 14th Amendment are American citizens, are living with one or more parent who's an unauthorized immigrant. So the fact is, the American people in their native decency would not tolerate the police measures necessary to wrench these people from our communities where they're woven into the fabric of our life. And furthermore, anyone who says these people ought to go home should face the simple demographic fact they are home. This is their home, and we should understand it's not a matter of welcoming them. They're our neighbors. They work for us, they work with us, they sit next to us in church and synagogues and elsewhere. This is a non-starter issue. It's one of the interesting things, surely, about this year's campaign. In 2016, Immigration was the burning issue for Mr. Trump from the time he came down that escalator until the election. The issue didn't exist this year. And Joe Biden, to his great credit, has said in the last day or so, he is for finding a path, not just to legality, not to legal, but a path to citizenship for these 10.5 million people, something that, by the way, a majority of Republicans favor.
That's interesting you should say that, because of course Trump was so opposed to immigration in general, it would appear, from the kinds of things that he said. So what do you think about the appointee that President Biden has proposed for the Department of Homeland Security?
Well, I think it's interesting that he's Hispanic. He's someone who recognizes this is a big, complicated, diverse country.
His parents fled with him from communism in Cuba.
Exactly. And I think it's a healthy sign. You know, the country is changing so rapidly. And let me give you an interesting statistic. In 1993, Florida became the first state in which deaths of white people outnumbered births of white people. That's now true in 26 states. This is a country changing rapidly, and the Republican Party will either adapt or it will expire. Now, American political parties are extremely sensitive seismographs, trembling to every tremor of public opinion and appetite. And I expect the Republican Party will change, but if it doesn't, it is in deep trouble, because Mr. Trump won in 2016 by getting largely evangelicals in an increasingly secular country, by getting rural people in an increasingly urbanized country. 87% of his vote in 2016 was white. He spent 4 years making no attempt to broaden his base. The strategy, therefore, this year was to get an even larger portion of an ever smaller slice of the American electorate. That is not a recipe for sustainable political prosperity on the part of the Republicans.
So do you agree then that the demographic change that you're talking about is in fact one of the things that motivates the anger of some Trump voters, and is racism at the base of it?
I don't think it's racism. There's some of that, but I think it's more understandable. I'm not saying it's admirable. I'm not saying it's acceptable, but it's an understandable sense that a country people are used to is changing rapidly. Now, look, if you don't like rapid change, you pick the wrong country, because this country has been changing rapidly since the founding era, when, by the way, Benjamin Franklin proposed that all laws should be printed in German as well as in English, because so many German speakers were in the country. When Abraham Lincoln began his ascent in politics in Illinois, where I am from, central Illinois, he invested in several German language newspapers in Illinois, because he said, let's face the fact, we're a big, diverse country, different languages, get over it.
Your ability to call on historical anecdotes and facts is just absolutely extraordinary. It's one of the things that I've always admired about you the most, and I just have to say that. Back to the census case, it's very important in California. Tell us why.
Well, the question is, who gets counted for the purposes of representation? And California has, I think 22% of unauthorized immigrants in this country. Los Angeles County has 10% of all of them. So obviously, if they're not counted for the enumeration relevant to allocating House seats, some House seats are going to go elsewhere. They're going to go to Texas, they're going to go to Florida, they're going to go who knows where, but California would be a loser. Now, as I say, I don't expect that to happen, but the stakes are very large. The census is the basis of $1.5 trillion in the allocation of federal funds every year. That's $15 trillion over the decade covered by the 2020 census. So this is a very high stakes matter, politically and economically.
Well, the census is already officially over. So if the court goes in the way that you would like it to go, what happens then? What's the remedy? Do we have to start the census over again?
No, because the census has counted unauthorized immigrants to the extent that it can. Unauthorized immigrants are often reluctant to talk to government officials for good reason, but they will be counted and they will be then swept into the pool of people on the basis of which congressional seats are allocated. So you won't have to have a do-over from the Senate.
Back to your devotion to the Constitution, what about the power of the presidency, the imperial presidency that you referred to earlier? And when you say that the institutions of government are safe and that the country is not shaky in that regard, does the Constitution need to be amended in some way or changed in some way in order to reinforce the separation of powers, to give Congress more of a real authority than it has now with respect to the president?
Congress has all the authority it needs. It needs to have the political will to exercise it. The fact is that Congress sometimes says presidents have usurped our power. If only presidents had to usurp it. The fact is Congress has been all too eager to shed power, because shedding power sheds responsibility, and shedding responsibility sheds political danger. And therefore they've given presidents of both parties, and presidents of both parties have gleefully exercised the vast discretion given to declare emergencies about this and that, declare an emergency and take spending allocated for one purpose and repurpose it to building a wall, for example. The president did. It's being litigated, but he could at least point to a legislation and said, Congress says I can do this. President Trump imposed steel tariffs and aluminum tariffs on our ally Canada in the name of national security. Now it's preposterous on the face, but he can do it because Congress has, again, under both parties, has given presidents of both parties far too much discretion. We don't need to change the Constitution. We need to elect men and women to Congress who take pride in the legislative branch and don't think of themselves as members of the president's team blocking and tackling for the president, but instead exercising the dignity inherent in the legislative branch.
I believe you're also an advocate of term limits, but I don't want to get into it because I think it's time to get some questions from the audience, and we have some, and they are very interesting indeed. John, for example, asks, should Trump be prosecuted for his conduct in office?
Not for his conduct in office. There's a way of doing that. It's the impeachment provision. We had that charade of an impeachment on party lines where he was acquitted. Congress had the ability to do that. It decided not to. It's very wise to let these things go, let the past be past. I know Gerald Ford perhaps lost his attempt to become an elected president in '76 because of a residue of resentment of his pardoning Richard Nixon, but it was statesmanlike. He cauterized the wound on the country and let the country move forward. So I would be very surprised if Joe Biden, who's a serious, mature veteran of Washington, who, by the way, was in the Senate in his second year in the Senate when Ford pardoned Nixon, will want to turn the country away from this. Now, whether Mr. Vance, who's the district attorney in New York City, has criminal and civil cases about Mr. Trump's taxes and all the rest, that can go forward, but that's of no concern to President Biden.
Cheryl wants to know, what are your thoughts about a new stimulus package?
Well, one is coming. I mean, it's very clear. We're going to argue about the sums, and that's good, wholesome politics. This is not the time. You're looking at the last deficit hawk in Washington, but even I say this is not the time for the kind of economies. We have to keep the American people, who are suffering enormously through no fault of their own. Millions of small businesses, mom and pop restaurants and grocery stores, it's through no fault of their own are being wiped out. And this is where we act as a community and help one another. So another stimulus is coming. Sooner or later, however, we have to face the music, and the music is this. We're now adding to the national debt by trillions at a time. Trillion is a big number. Let me give you this. A trillion seconds ago was 31,000 years ago. We invented agriculture 10,000 years ago. Trillion is a big number. Now, economists argue at what point, when the debt becomes relative to GDP, that is to the size of the economy, at what point does it become dangerous? 10 years ago, the national debt was 53% of GDP. Now it's over 100%. According to the Congressional Budget Office, on current trajectory, it will reach twice the size of the economy in 2050. Now, some people say, well, public borrowing is so cheap with interest rates so low, the globe awash in savings, we can do this without risk. That's fine if you know that you're going to have low interest rates indefinitely. But remember this also about debt. Debt is taxation deferred. There are two ways to finance a government, and only two: current taxes and future taxes, with an asterisk over that. A third way to pay for it is inflation, to inflate away your debt. And that will become an ever more powerful temptation as the debt becomes ever more burdensome.
Whoa. Will you just repeat that explanation you gave of a trillion?
Yes, a trillion seconds ago was 31,000 years ago. Our ancestors—
very helpful image. Thank you for that.
10,000 years ago.
Joel wants to know, will Trump continue to be a force in politics and in the Republican Party?
Joel, I think, has asked the $64,000 question. He can be if he wants to be, because he has 74 million people watched him for 4 years and said, we want 4 more years of this. So there's a very significant number of people out there who respond to him. The Republican Party has behaved as it has done, and with, as I said, canine loyalty, because they're terrified of a large portion of their constituents and the power of him tweeting to arouse these people. So it seems to me he can if he wants to be, and that will be the drama of the 2024 Republican presidential nomination competition. There are going to be those who say, well, we're going to be the next generation of Trumpkins, and there will be others. I'm hopeful Ben Sass of Nebraska and others will be out there saying, no, that was a wrong turn for the country and we can do better. But it's going to be fascinating.
Well, let me just ask a follow. What about those other senators you mentioned earlier? And if they are eager to run for a president, will they be able to do it if Trump is still around, indicating that he might want to run for president?
I'm not sure Mr. Trump's going to want to run for president again. In the first place, his personal finances are going to be a shambles. They're already a shambles. He's not nearly as rich as he has lied about being. Second, he's going to be 78. I'm not sure he's a martyr to physical fitness from the looks of him. I think he's not going to be fit to run for president or even to amble for president in 4 more years.
Here's Sharon, who wants to know, what is your assessment of the role of the media, the news media, I presume she means, over the past 4 years?
Well, I'm afraid the news media over the past 4 years has suffered from Trump derangement syndrome. They have decided that Trump was such a threat to the country that they adopted an adversarial stance. Now, that's understandable. Trump's genius was to take up space in the heads of people and not get out. But in a way, what happened was American journalism went back to its origins. In the 1790s, when suddenly political parties, which the founders neither desired nor anticipated, suddenly emerged, the American newspapers, and Americans were voracious readers of newspapers back then, were often aligned with parties, indeed supported by the parties. For example, when Thomas Jefferson was Secretary of State, he gave lucrative printing contracts to sympathetic newspapers, and the Federalists did the same thing when they had power. Then we went into a period, and we may look back upon it as an evanescent episode in our life where we at least aspired to objective journalism. We've set aside that aspiration in recent years, particularly under Donald Trump, and I think some newspapers are going to have a moment of reflection and say, maybe we ought to get back to that.
Jack has a question that is somewhat reflective of what we've already talked about, but I think it's really worth asking. And it has to really to do, I think, more than anything else, with the big lie technique that Trump has used by repeating the same thing over and over and over and over again. It says, what about the 70% of Republicans who believe the election was stolen?
Well, that's the problem. One of the things we've learned from the last 4 years, and this goes back to my anxieties about the modern presidency in general, is the tone-setting power of a president, armed with modern communication. The first great enhancement, technological enhancement of presidential power was radio. We tend to think of radio as something banal and of minor importance. When Franklin Roosevelt sat down for his first fireside chat, the presidency itself changed. It was almost a constitutional moment. Then came television and Jack Kennedy's mastery of that. Now we have Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and the internet, all of the social media, which has made presidents ubiquitous. Presidents are everywhere all the time. My candidate that I favored for the Democratic nomination this year was Senator Bennett of Colorado, because he tweeted out, he says, if I'm elected president, you'll go weeks at a time. You won't have to think about me. Wonderful to have a president like that. So again, we're going to have to recage the executive lion. We have to get the presidency shrunk back to a normal dimension. You know, Americans all over this country are watching The Crown these days, and they're looking at the curious role of the monarchy in Britain. Britain, like a lot of other countries, separates the head of government from the head of state, which the Queen is. We in the United States don't make that distinction, and therefore the president acquires a kind of derivative dignity that is over time not wholesome. It's infantilizing of this country. And so when as the questioner asks about the 74 million people who take him at his word because they're not skeptical of presidents in general, a little wholesome, down-to-earth doubt about executive power would make us all better off.
Here's Carol, excuse me, I'm sorry. Yes, it's Carol. Are you troubled with regard to Trump's withdrawal from the Open Skies Treaty? And I might add, I think that he is destroying the very airplanes that have been used to conduct surveillance under the Open Skies Treaty.
Yes, I am. And I think one of the first things you're going to see is that Joe Biden, who spent a large portion of his 36 years in the Senate on the Foreign Relations Committee, who has traveled incessantly for 36 years, is going to take national security much more seriously than the current president has. Remember, the current president abandoned the Kurds in the middle of a phone call with the president of Turkey. He said, oh, well, you take care of it, which so appalled some of his military leadership that they resigned. And this is the most important thing he can do, Mr. Biden, is to, again, take national security seriously. You know, what presidents are for, we can argue about, but the first responsibility of the president is to attend to the security of the country. And we've had a 4-year hiatus in that.
We talked about the case that's coming up next Monday in the Supreme Court. Andrew wants to know, what's your best guess as to where the Supreme Court is heading?
I think the Supreme Court is going to surprise a lot of people. I think the Supreme Court is now full of people who call themselves originalists. That is, they will be tethered to the original public meaning of the text as they understand it and as scholars can unearth it. I think there's not going to be what you'd call judicial activism. Frankly, I'm for more judicial activism rather than less, because I think often judicial restraint is dereliction of the judicial duty to restrain importuning and overbearing majorities. I grew up in central Illinois, Lincoln Country, Champaign County. Local lore has it that Lincoln was in Champaign County Courthouse when he heard that the Kansas-Nebraska Act had been passed in 1854. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, the brainstorm of an Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas, said, the problem fracturing the country is what should we do about the possibility of the expansion of slavery into the territories such as Kansas and Nebraska. Douglas said, we'll solve that with popular sovereignty. Vote it up, vote it down, it's a matter of indifference. The important thing in America is popular sovereignty. Lincoln said no. Lincoln's recoil that propelled him to greatness was him saying, America is not about a process, majority rule, it's about a condition, liberty. And I would like to see a Supreme Court more active in the defense of liberty. Here's my libertarian-ish side coming out. So I'm not one of those who says I want the court to be more passive. I want the court to be more vigilant and engaged on behalf of liberty.
Jonathan, back to the issue of the media. Do you think that the fairness doctrine should be brought back by the FCC?
God, no. The fairness doctrine was bad enough when there was at least a tissue-thin technological reason for it, that radio bands were scarce and television bands were scarce, and therefore government was going to tell us what fairness was. Now, if you think the government is good at this, then good luck to you. I don't. The technological reason for that is gone. I mean, we have, back when we had 3 channels or maybe 4, maybe 5, was one thing. Now we got 500 channels and we have the internet. There's no scarcity. We now have a cornucopia of information. We hardly need the government to police it.
John wants to know, what is your best guess as to the reason for President Trump's strange relationship with Russia?
Well, I think, first of all, he just responds to, like an iron filling is drawn to a magnet, he is drawn to strongmen. Mr. Trump is a weak person's idea of a strong person, and his obvious affection for Erdogan in Turkey and Putin in Russia and the rest speaks for itself. Second, we don't know yet, but by the time Vance and others in the Southern District of New York get done looking through the president's financials, we may find that when, after his 4th bankruptcy, this wizard of a businessman named Donald Trump, after his 4th bankruptcy, he found that, understandably enough, there were not a lot of lenders willing to lend to him, and he may have become dependent upon some Russian oligarchs and others. That's speculation, but it's not entirely uninformed speculation, and I think we should wait to see, but that would help explain the affection he has for things Russian.
I'm trying to find the question that I saw and flipped away from, because I know the substance of it, but I don't know who asked it. But the question is, how are the Cubs going to do this year?
I'm not even sure who the Cubs are going to be if they get rid of some others. We're all going to be, I hate to tell this to you people, but we're all going to be chasing the Dodgers. You got the best player in the National League in Mookie Betts. There's rumors that you're going to get the 3rd baseman from the Rockies, Nolan Arenado. The rich get richer, and it's the Dodgers are a dynasty and a well-run dynasty.
How did you like this 60-game season with nobody in the stands, at least until the World Series?
Well, I hated it. I'll tell you why. In 2019, the Washington Nationals, I'm a season ticket holder, after 50 games in 2019, they were 19 wins and 31 losses. They turned it around and won the World Series because they had a 162-game season to do that in. This year, after 50 games, the Nationals again were 19 and 31, but you didn't have the time. The beauty of baseball is it's the most severe meritocracy. After 162 games, you are what your record says you are. And 60-game season was hard to take seriously. Never mind putting a runner on second base in extra innings and these other, well, I'm a conservative. I don't like it.
What about the pace of baseball, though? It's so slow by comparison to basketball, for
It's
example.
awful. And if baseball does not find a way to increase the pace, 3 hours and 6 minutes, the average of a 9-inning game, almost 4 minutes before the ball is put in play on average now. Baseball now is the 3 true outcomes: walks, strikeouts, home runs. It's boring. You have these stunning athletes: Baez of the Cubs, Chapman on third base at Oakland, Arenado third base of the Rockies, and the ball's not put in play because they all want to hit the ball out of the ballpark. And there's a reason for that. Velocity is overwhelming the game. These teams have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 pitchers who are 6'5" and throw 95. And it's killing the game right now. There's no question about it. I want to make baseball safe for Rod Carew and Tony Gwynn again.
How about the umpires? Now that the video shows whether there was really a ball or really a strike, why not require the umpires to simply go by that? And they have other things that they can do. They don't have to call the balls and strikes. They have additional activity.
Well, I think you're going to see some automation of the strike zone coming fairly soon, but you're still going to need a man behind the plate for various calls. But there will be that difference. But if they don't change the pace of play, young people nowadays, they want life at the speed of their telephones. They want a 5G existence, and baseball has added, in the last 30 years, 45 minutes to the length of a game with less and less action. And that's got to change.
Well, speaking as I am from the home of the World Series champion, the Dodgers, I simply had to ask you something about baseball. But let me now give you an opportunity. We've got go ahead. Do you got some more?
Most important game of the year, as I'm sure you Los Angelinos would agree, was Game 6 of this World Series.
Sure.
27 outs for each team, 54 outs. Exactly 27 of those outs were strikeouts. That's too many.
So what do we do about that? What do you mean it's too many?
If the game is going to be walks, strikeouts, and home runs, walking to first base, walking back to the dugout, or trotting around the bases after a home run, people are going to find more excitement in the NBA, in the Premier League soccer in England. They're going to find action, not this slow molasses in January kind of action in baseball.
Take a couple of minutes to reflect in whatever way you want to on what you think is upcoming. That's the theme of our program, is not just the impact of the Trump era, but where do we go from here? Just give us a general sense of your feeling about things, and a final word on how you think things are going.
I'm looking on the bright side, as I, as a conservative, am disinclined to do. But looking on the bright side, I think there is a bright side to be looked upon. I think the American people acquitted themselves well this year. They came out to vote, they organized, they registered, they voted right through a pandemic. They took advantage of absentee ballots and early voting. They have the highest percentage turnout in more than a century. The country has experienced something it really did not like. And I think Mr. Biden's transition, and his campaign for that matter, will pitch perfect for what the American people want. I think the American people are ready for adult supervision and good manners. A lot of people say, well, said to me, well, your criticism of Mr. Trump is aesthetic. And I say, that's quite right. Aesthetics matter in life. It's called manners. It's called civility. It's called the mores, customs, habits, and dispositions that lubricate life in a continental society. And so I think the American people are ready to turn around and buckle down on immigration, protectionism, inequality, all these things. We are not Bangladesh. We're a country that can get well by choosing to get well. You know, Winston Churchill, who loved our country as much as he loved his American-born mother, once said, the American people invariably do the right thing after they have exhausted all the alternatives. Well, we're pretty far down the list of alternatives, and I think are about to make some sensible, decent, difficult, but not ruinous choices. So smile.
I said at the outset that it was a privilege to talk with you, and I feel that way even more having done so for the past hour. Thank you so very much for this program. And let me say to the audience as well, and to you, have a good Thanksgiving, restrained though it may be, and wear the mask. I want to just remind the audience that next week's program will be with Adam Schiff and Madeline Brand. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody, and thanks very much for having been here.